Hello, dear followers. Then we are once again at another episode of Breakfast Intellectual Bites. And today we're going to speak about a kind of topic that many of the educators all around the world deal with, and namely about world Englishes. Then you can observe that we have a guest, but before I'm going to introduce our guest today, the Breakfast Intellectual Bites episode, I'd like to make a short intro about world Englishes, because I'm sure that as we're streaming for the teachers all around the world, I'm sure that they know where the term came from and what it means. Then the term Englishes refers to the differences of the English language that emerged in different parts of the world. The scholars of world Englishes identify great variety of Englishes used in different social linguistic contexts. Then languages develop to fulfill the needs of the societies, and they change in accordance with the needs of the society. And all across the world, there are different variants of one and the same language. Then when we speak about the term Englishes, then in 1988 in Hawaii, Honolulu, the International Committee of the Study of the World Englishes was formed. But this term was coined and introduced by an Indian linguist, Kachru, who spoke about three concentric circle model. Then we have the inner circle that refers to those countries that use the English language as the primary language. That's the United States, UK, New Zealand, Australia. Then we have the outer circle that refers to those countries where English is used, but that was as a consequence of a kind of historical a kind of colonial history. And then we have the extended circle. That's the circle that refers to all the countries that use the English language. Then this is namely the topic of today's conversation. And it's my great pleasure to introduce Dr. Freddie Bowles, who is the program director of the Master of Arts in Teaching Education at the Department of Curriculum and Instruction of the University of Arkansas, Fayetteville. She got her PhD degree at the same university, and she decided she wants to serve this university, and she has been working for a very long period of time as a professor at this university. Then her teaching interests vary from ballet and jazz to foreign and second language methods, social justice, and multicultural education. It's necessary to point out some of the honors and the awards that Dr. Bowles got. And I'd like to mention the Educator of Excellence from the Arkansas Foreign Language Teachers Association, and the national recognition for foreign language education that was awarded by the National Council for Accreditation of Teacher Education. There are many more, but I have selected two that I thought are of great importance in such a way that the people understand that you are really a personality that has the right to speak about the term world Englishes. Thank you so much, Dr. Bowles, for joining us today. That's great having you today at the Breakfast Intellectual Bites episode.
Well, I really appreciate being here, and I thank you again, Victoria, for inviting me. And let's just say we'll be on first names recognition here, so I appreciate that. And hello to the viewers. I see one has just popped up right now.
Yeah.
So, I'm glad to be here.
Let's start. Then I have a series of questions. First of all, I'd like that the people learn a little bit about your professional background. Could you a little bit expand on your professional background, Dr. Bowles?
Absolutely. I am one of those people who had an urge or a calling to be a teacher from childhood, with my own classroom set up, my dolls and animals as my students. So I always knew I wanted to be a teacher. I thought I wanted to be an English teacher in the United States, But as I began to learn other languages, I realized that I wanted to teach foreign languages, as it was called at that time, not world languages, but foreign languages. So I began to learn German as my second language, and then dabbled in French and Spanish, and have had some experience with other languages simply because of travel and interest in things like that. But my first degree was actually a bachelor's of arts in the humanities, because I loved literature and I wanted to focus my major area on English literature and language. And if I had gotten an education degree, I would have had to cut the number of hours in the system that we're in for education. So then I went from there, and I thought, well, I'll be a teacher, but I didn't have a license. So as you know, in teacher preparation, you go through a program and you get a standard license for teaching. So I went to the University of Arkansas for a Master's of Arts degree in German, because that was the language I was most interested in at the time. Completed that program of study, still could not get employed as a high school teacher because I didn't have a license. So I decided I would just travel. So I left the United States, traveled through Europe, worked in Switzerland for a bit of time, and then traveled overland from Europe to India. And at that time, again, this dates me, but it was still a trip that was possible. And that became another education entirely, not only for language, but also for culture, because traveling outside of Europe into the Middle East and then into India was quite an experience of cultures. And it really made me appreciate the humanity that was that I had never been exposed to, coming from a small rural area in Arkansas. So I began to get interested not only in the languages, but also in the cultures of other people who spoke those languages. And that seems to be a no-brainer these days, because language and culture, as we know, go hand in hand. But at that time, language was really taught from the perspective of grammar translation. You were learning about language. It was more linguistic based rather than cultural based. And it wasn't until probably the 90s, really, that we started integrating those two pieces in our, at least in foreign language education in the United States. Culture and language go hand in hand. So returned to the United States, began teaching in public schools. I went back to school yet again and got my standard license, and began my career that I so loved, was teaching. And at the same time, I was also studying dance as well as languages, and I began teaching dance classes along with my public school teaching. So the trajectory is quite long, so I hope that you all will follow me through these decades of practice. I taught for 5 years in public or private schools at the secondary level, and I was teaching German and dance and English, and I did a little bit of French and Spanish. You know, if you need a teacher that's a language teacher, you know, you just say, hey, you got, you know, so many credits, come on and teach, which was really a challenge, not being fluent in French or Spanish, but so it happens. And then I decided to devote part of my teaching time and children, raising our son, to dance education. So I began teaching after school hours, ballet and jazz, and then got a job in a performing arts school where I was teaching German and ballet and jazz. And my husband and I really wanted to have our son experience another culture and to grow up in another culture and learn another language. And in the United States, you don't begin to learn other languages until high school. And it's really too late to become proficient in a language at that time, as we know. So we moved overseas, and I got a job teaching in Hungary. So our son spent 2 years in Hungary, became a fluent speaker of Hungarian. I'm a novice person. But that set me on a track to teach EFL, because I was an EFL teacher there in Hungary, teaching Hungarian future teachers of English, actually. And I was also teaching at a technical college, so students that were required to take it as a foreign language. So two different backgrounds there. But that led me into the ESL world when I returned to the United States in an intensive English program where I was teaching ESL to international students that wanted to matriculate into the college where I was working. And then from there, I went into my PhD work, and that's where Victoria came into play.
Okay, yeah.
After I finished my PhD, it was in curriculum and instruction. I became interested in teacher preparation because of all the experiences I had had as a teacher. And that's what I do now, is prepare teachers to teach foreign languages and English as a second or foreign language.
Okay, that's right. And we met in 2016, and I attended the Structures of American English. Okay, the American language. That was really great. Then when I introduced you, and I said that you are the program director of Masters of Arts. Could you tell us what is it like to be the program director of a program in the United States?
Well, first of all, it's a volunteer position. So along with teaching and the other responsibilities I have as a professor, I took on this administrative role. And part of it involved recruitment, assessment of students' ability to be a teacher prior to enrolling in our program. So the admission process, and then organizing their internships out in the public school so they could do their practice teaching, and working with our public school partners, our secondary public school partners. It also involved organizing special meetings and professional development for my students, oftentimes sponsoring them for presentations or professional development, going to conferences, things like that. And then making sure that they were getting the preparation they needed to become teachers in their fields, which was math, science, foreign languages, English, and social studies.
Okay.
So it was very time consuming, lots of paperwork, lots of reporting, lots of meetings with, other professors about their programs as well.
Then generally that's a kind of position on a volunteering basis. You are very committed to change something or to help people to provide qualitative education in the United States, and you want to serve them. Okay, thank you so much. Then I think that many of the people don't know what courses you generally teach at the University of Arkansas. Could you tell us what are the courses that you are teaching right now? Because now you're not teaching. I don't know whether you are teaching in the summer session, but
yeah, this summer I'm not. We have kind of a rotating system. So in the summer, it's considered extra compensation. So you get paid extra for teaching in the summer. So we have a rotating system where all the professors can choose or choose not to teach in the summer. So that gives everybody an opportunity. Last summer, I did teach the social justice and multicultural sections, 2 classes, which was the most rewarding classes I think I've ever taught, because we were in COVID isolation. So I had to learn how to teach via technology, using technology remotely. And also because it was a lot of civil unrest and social issues that had bubbled up as a result of COVID. George Floyd was murdered. A lot of inequities were uncovered in health systems and other systems in the United States. So that was a wonderful experience for all of us, and the students did give positive feedback about the class as well. The semester, I taught the structured course again.
Okay.
I thought of you, Victoria. And I usually teach every semester the methods of teaching a world language, or a foreign language in this case. So my primary responsibility is with the secondary education programs, and we now have a new program called the Bachelor of Arts in Teaching. So I'm actually have now moved from MAT to the bachelor's program, and our students can get a BA in humanities in their content area: English, French, German, Spanish, or social studies or history. And they can get a Bachelor of Arts in Teaching, so they're getting their pedagogy courses as well, and a standard license, and they can do it in 4 years. So this is really a new program that's exploding with students, so to speak. So I'm working with those students as well. So I've been teaching a practicum course, which is an observation course in the public schools that students have before they do their full practice teaching or internship. I've been teaching Understanding People of Other Cultures, which is also one of our ESL endorsement classes, and the methods classes for teaching foreign languages. So those are my primary courses right now.
What is the course that you like the most and you think is the most rewarding?
Well, last summer, I would say the social justice course was, simply because of the timing and the appropriateness and the impact it had on our students. Everyone was really, truly wanting to be the best teacher they could be for all students. And as you know, the United States is a very multicultural, multilingual country now, and a lot of our students are from multiple ethnic groups, and we have students that are speaking up to 20 or 30 languages in our schools besides English, and they're learning English as a second language. So our students want to be effective teachers with best practices. So part of that, of course, is recognizing and understanding the culture of the students in your class. So this was really, I think, those two classes right now, Understanding People of Other Cultures, have been my favorite this past year.
Okay, thank you so much. I know that you generally, you are directed towards multicultural approach to teaching a language. And I think that's the best one, because if you focus both on the source culture and on the target culture, there is a great probability then the kids, the learners are going to learn the language, the second language, English, much better. Then our topic today is about world Englishes. Mm-hmm. Then the Americans adore their language, and they consider that that's their language and that's American language, and it's completely different from British English. Is this right?
That's a really good question, Victoria, and I have to recommend Melvin Bragg is one of my favorite authors, and he does a lot of books on English, historically, linguistically, and historically and culturally. And I would say American English has, of course, developed from British English. So historically, the settlers, the colonists were British English speakers for the most part. And so it has evolved from that language itself. So you might say we're the daughter of British English, maybe, but it is quite different. And you know, if I'm watching BBC movies or shows, I usually have to have subtitles, honestly, because the British English sounds so differently, and because there's so many idioms and so much slang involved in British English that it's almost like a second language for me, even as an English first language speaker. So there are, I think, vast differences now. The daughter has had many daughters since then, and we have really developed in a way that's unique to the United States. And I think especially, and perhaps even with British English now, again, being a very multicultural country, we have so many other languages that are influencing American English. And English, you know, in general too. So there's, you know, so many influences on the language that it's really kind of a multicultural language. When we think of the French that contributed to British English, Latin was a huge influence. And then all the other invaders that came over and contributed, the Angles and the Jutes and the Saxons and now and then the modern Englishes, the world Englishes that we have are also contributing to both I think British English probably more so than US English, but there's still a lot of influences on American English too.
You know, you're not the first of the Americans in here who say that when watching BBC, they generally have the subtitles on. Okay, I don't know why. I thought that, okay, you understand very well everything because, okay, I can understand American English. Okay, maybe there are some idioms that I'm not aware. I can figure out in a way, okay, this might mean this because the context requires it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. But generally, okay, that's really in a way weird that the Americans have the subtitles on when they watch the BBC news. Uh-huh.
I was going to say, you know, if I don't have the subtitles on, I could probably pick up 60%.
Okay.
You know, of the, so it just helps with the finer points and the finer pronunciations, depending on which dialect of British English is being spoken. But then I think even more so than the pronunciation and the sound of the language is actually the idioms and the slang in any languages. You have to be au courant, so to speak, in the moment. And that changes so rapidly. It's hard for all of us, I think.
Yeah, that's really right. Moreover, the American English that I came into contact with 4 years ago has changed a lot again. Then I can say that it's really a living body and the language has changed a lot. And absolutely the British English has changed too.
Mm-hmm.
Could you tell me what are the most important differences between American English and British English that a foreigner who is traveling to the United States should be aware of?
Wow, that's a really tough question. I guess it depends on your first language too and how closely related you are. If in the Indo-European language family, if you're a German speaker and you're going to either country, I think you'll have a little bit easier time listening to the pronunciation because you're in the same family and the structures are very similar. But if you're maybe in the Romance language family, then, you know, you may have a little bit more difficulty. But gosh, I'm really trying to think what would be, I think pronunciation is the first thing. That's going to be really one of the major differences between the two languages that you have to really pay attention to. Learn the sounds of the language. And this is something I really began to focus on in my own teaching right now for my foreign language classes. We don't work on pronunciation enough. And so the students don't know the sounds. And we know that oftentimes, you know, even basic language speakers can be understood by speakers of their first language if they have pretty good syntax and pronunciation. But if you don't have the pronunciation, it can really influence that comprehension. So I would say be aware of the pronunciation differences first.
Okay.
And then slang. I mean, slang is, again, depending on your age group, you really need to know the communicative language if you want to go back to Cummings. But I think that's really important. And always attention in language classes. Do you teach the academic, the CALP, or do you teach the BICS, the communicative language? And I think that's something to be aware of too, that the spoken language is going to be very different from the written language. So for those of us that grow up and go to college and learn language through our universities, oftentimes we're really focused on the written language rather than the spoken language. And that was my first realization when I went to Europe for I guess it was the second time, I can't remember, but I had studied German for 7-8 years and thought I would just be fine. And I land and I can't understand anybody. I mean, I'm like, this doesn't sound like my textbook. What's wrong here? You know? I'm ready to conjugate all these verbs and nobody speaks that way. So, you know, I think that's the other realization.
Yeah, that's right. Are there any differences in grammar?
Well, I would say Yes, in some respects that the tenses are used differently. Continuous tense, especially our progressive tense, whichever term you use for that, in American English is different from British English. Like I can say, I'm loving it, but that would
Okay.
be a verb that's
Since the verb of
used
sense
in the
possession
progressive.
is generally not used with continuous.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah. So, but those I think with this, with the grammar and with the syntax, I mean, again, by people who are used to listening to a lot of different kinds of languages and speakers, that's not going to really interfere with comprehension. I think more so is pronunciation and just vocabulary and having that sort of broader access to words.
Okay.
Because if I use something in the wrong past tense, and I'm saying this through my experience with working recently in Bolivia and having to use Spanish so much, people will understand me even if my verb tense is wrong. And if I ask them to like help me out, correct me, they'll tell me. Usually they're just polite and we just keep talking. But so I think, really, if we're looking at accuracy versus communication, accuracy is really important for certain professions and things that we do. But if you're looking strictly at communication, I would say really focus on a lot of just speaking, using the language, all the tools that you have in your language toolbox to communicate. And most speakers of the target language will be able to comprehend you.
Okay. Could you tell me then, ESL turned out to be not quite attractive for a great number of people. There is something else that the students are attracted by, and they generally don't want to go in for ESL. How do you generally motivate, as you are the program director, how do you generally motivate or recruit students to come to the ESL?
Well, the best way is if you're interested in traveling and visiting other countries. And that is really, I think, the trick to getting students interested in teaching ESL. They come back from a trip and they're really motivated. They're learning the language of the other country, and they're realizing the difficulties of actually learning a language, how long it takes. It's not like you learn in school when you really want to learn it in country. And they become motivated to teach here in the United States, at least, to help those students that are learning English. And so they are our first sort of target audience, is who is doing that. And then those students in world languages and in English education, they're the second audience, because generally they're already interested in language or they wouldn't be in those fields. And so we really encourage them to get their ESL endorsement or to continue their education and get that MED and TESOL. So international students as well are very interested in our MED TESOL program. So we try to recruit as many international students as we can. It's been difficult because of, COVID and political restrictions in the recent years, but I think that's going to change. So those are sort of our target people. Other than that, because it is a language and, people in the United States are monolingual and really don't even know anything about their own first language of English, they're just not really interested in teaching the language. I think you have to be a special person, a personality, to want to teach a language anyway.
Okay, I think that there are many other interests and many other opportunities in here, except teaching English as a second language. That's why the Great Opportunities offers great choices. And okay, never know.
Yeah.
Dr. Bowles, you are working with Bolivia. Could you share something from this kind of partnership that you have with Bolivia?
Well, this started through an NGO that I work with. I'm actually president of the Arkansas chapter right now, called Partners of the Americas. And this was established during President Kennedy's tenure as president as a people-to-people ambassadorship. So each state in the United States was partnered with a Latin American country, someone either, all the way from Mexico down to Chile. And Arkansas is partnered with Bolivia, specifically Santa Cruz, which is the largest commercial city in Bolivia. So I had an opportunity. There's a binational center there, and a binational center is sponsored by the State Department of the United States in collaboration with our partner government. So in this case, Bolivia. And their role in the country is to be cultural ambassadors. So they teach English as a foreign language, and they have representatives from different universities and schools if students are interested in studying abroad. And basically, a library and different facilities for sports and things. So it's sort of a little mini U.S. ambassadorship there. So this particular school, the CBA, Centro Boliviano Americano, was wanting to change their curriculum. They were teaching EFL, and they had a lot of students, over 7,000 students.
Oh, that's
huge facility there. And they didn't have a curriculum. They were just buying textbooks and teaching by the textbooks in series. So the first year I went down there through this organization, and we decided, and this is interesting because they were really debating about using the Central European frameworks. But my suggestion was that they use the frameworks from the American Council on the Teaching of Foreign Language, because English is a foreign language there. And we have proficiency standards, performance guidelines, everything already worked out through our National Foreign Language Association. TESOL is different. TESOL really focuses a lot on ESL for one thing, but their EFL standards and things are not as pronounced or defined, in my humble opinion, as through this foreign language. And the other thing is, they're supported by the U.S. government. So British English the British embassy is not supporting this institution.
No,
so
that's right.
That's political. Right. So I was like, okay, well, what if we look at this EFL through the lens of a world language and use their proficiency guidelines and their frameworks to devise the curriculum. And so they were on board with it. And we already have assessments and things that we can use. So for 3 years following that, the CBA supported my travel to come down there. I had a girlfriend that I stayed with, and I worked with them on refining this. And we're at the point right now, we had to stop because of COVID, we did our first pilot study last year of switching from textbook-focused, grammar-focused instruction to communicative language teaching in a way that meets the standards of the proficiency guidelines. So proficiency-based instructions. In other words, rather than looking at, can you pass this 100-question grammar test, we're looking at, can you communicate? Can you express your needs? Can you ask for something? And then how do you do this within these proficiency frameworks? So that's been fascinating. And I am really hopeful that I can get back down there this next year and we can go ahead and complete that. The next stage would be setting up their own standards for each of their levels, and then teacher training.
Dr. Bowles, do you generally, I'm sure that the kids in Bolivia, they are different and their interests are different and their possibilities and language abilities are different. Do you generally take into account some of the elements in differentiating strategies of teaching English as a foreign language in the curriculum that you have decided upon?
We do, and interestingly enough, because of the large number of students that they have, they're able to really place the students according to their needs. So like in our schools, we may have in a Spanish 1 class as a foreign language, there may be heritage speakers of Spanish, novice speakers, non-speakers, and you really have to differentiate a lot. But with CBA, because of these different levels, they had 4 different levels and they're all divided into 3 sub-levels. You could really place the students appropriately. Also, because it's the clientele, for the most part, are middle class. So the socioeconomic standard is fairly similar because it is, you have to be able to afford these classes. So that's one thing. But there are students from different areas of Bolivia with different backgrounds. There's 33 indigenous tribes that are recognized in Bolivia. So a lot of the students are, of different ethnic backgrounds. So this is something that we've been discussing. And also it comes up with, my perspective on the first few days of class is that you get to know their students, their needs, the way that they learn a language, their study habits. And then as their teacher, you're able to take that information and design the instruction that really meets their needs and where they are. So we approach it from that way, which is a way to differentiate based on their needs and things.
Then generally you take into account this kind of idea of multiple intelligences that prevail.
Absolutely. Yeah. Learning styles, multiple intelligences, again, even your economic background, your gender background, your ethnic background, all of those variables of our identity, we take into consideration.
And as far as I could understand, then you generally departed from the idea of a textbook. Do you recommend some resources to be used in training the language skills, or nothing? The teacher is up to the teacher. What is the general procedure of content choice?
Well, I love that question. And of course, my idea initially was just to throw the textbooks away. But fortunately, cooler heads prevailed. And this is from the Bolivian perspective. They're like, first of all, their teachers are not trained in traditional programs. They're proficient in English. And then the CBA provides some training for them as teachers. So a lot of them have never, been in a teacher preparation program. They don't know how to teach. They really need that structure of the textbook. So I had to compromise my vision of what this would look like. So what we decided to do was a compromise. The textbook would be a resource, and we would use it to design strategies and instruction to really promote listening and speaking. So we really wanted to focus on listening and speaking at the lower levels, the novice levels, to get a lot of input and provide the students with the opportunity for a lot of output. So we chose particular chapters or exercises or things that would really fit that kind of mindset. And then as they progressed along the proficiency, the grammar would be introduced more specifically for accuracy and fluency. So I had to compromise on that. So the textbooks are still being used, but they're being used selectively and supported heavily by technology and, things like, practicing with Duolingo or some of the other ways that students can use the language. Here in the U.S., I did have textbooks, but they're always selected purposefully for the theme or whatever it is, the reading that we're going to discuss or have. So they're not traditional textbooks. For example, in my social justice class, we had a small textbook on brain research and cognition and how that relates to differentiation in learning. And then the other textbook we used was about the history of the United States from a multicultural perspective. So it looked at different ethnic groups and how they had been affected by policies of the United States government. And
do you recommend American English to be taught or British English?
Well, in Bolivia, I said American English because it's a American English to support it, or the U.S. Embassy is supporting that institution. But I also said, because there were a lot of students who had studied abroad in British-speaking countries or had been trained in British-speaking countries, I said, offer that as electives. For those students who really are interested, you can have a track. So we looked at different tracks like British English, English for special purposes, advanced writing and comp, those kinds of things that students could take as electives during their program. Here in the U.S., of course, when we're teaching ESL, the main focus is on K-12 education because these are students that are in the system and everything is American English. I mean, it's just, it's a no-brainer, so to speak, because the whole education system is set up as American English. Now, in college, of course, you can take British literature, British English pronunciation, things like that as electives if you want to. But as far as world Englishes go, I don't have a preference. I would say that if you're planning on studying in an American English university, you should really study and prepare for American English because it is a shock. And I have a lot of students that come in from British speaking countries that are second language speakers, other language speakers of English. And it's really a challenge to sort of shift that language to American English. I mean, I understand it but there's a lot of their professors, if they're not in our program in education, that will mark them down for misspelling words. I mean, British spelling is different, or using certain terms without articles. I mean, when you talk about non-count nouns, I mean, what is a non-count noun? That's different between British and American English. So little things like that, people will notice or maybe not understand that process of coherency in writing that is also a little bit different. So, yeah.
I wanted to ask, what do you understand by professional development? What is professional development for you, and what is generally professional? Is professional development important for those that are in ESL or EFL?
Well, one of our criterion for becoming a teacher is professional development. So it's built into the process of becoming a teacher. So just like, I think when you were here, did we go to Art TESOL when you were here?
Yeah.
So that's, we recommend that our students do that. We require them to do that. And then we give them opportunities in our program to also have professional development. Like we talk about, we have one on how to use Google Classroom, what are the code of ethics for teachers, for example. How do you teach using backward design? I mean, so there's different ways to do that. And then I always encourage my students to become a member of TESOL or ACTFL and try to present their lessons at a conference. So it is built into our program of study, and it's also part of their evaluation, not only as a service teacher, but as a teacher. School, part of my evaluation from my principal or our administration is my role as a professional. What do I do to contribute to the profession of English teaching or world language teaching?
Okay, then professional development is very important. Moreover, when we speak about world Englishes, then necessarily we are supposed to share the expertise, because otherwise we will never get aware of what's going on in other countries, because the language is a living body. It changes very rapidly. Yes, the last thing, Dr. Bowles, recommendations for the teachers that are educators that are teaching English in other countries.
Yes, I would say, first of all, build your learning community. Figure out who your students are, what their needs are. And even if you're in a monoculture where the students are the same, nationality as you are, they're very individual students, and they each approach language learning differently. And we know the affective filter for language learning is very high for the most part. So we wanted the students to get to know you and them to get to know each other, because to learn a language, you have to speak it. And I would say teachers speak less, provide opportunities for students to speak more, because that's the only way you're going to learn how to use a language, is to make mistakes and use the language. I tell my language teacher students, it doesn't matter if they haven't learned all the verb tenses. If you're going to do an activity, give them the form, give them the sentence stems that they need so that they can practice it. They don't have to sit down and memorize word order and endings and, agreement. Give them that information and let them experiment with it and practice it. They'll figure out soon enough that if I want to say I do something or you do something in other languages, that verb form may change.
Yeah.
And I think we focus way too much on grammar, not enough on pronunciation, and not enough on students experimenting with the language. Let them have fun with language. The other thing I've really been focusing on lately with my student is authentic text. Yeah, not levelized text, not, adapted text by textbooks. And I tell them, edit the task, not the text. So we just had this conversation the other day with one of my future teachers. And I said, you can take that same article, and you're teaching 4 levels of Spanish. You can use it in all 4 levels. But what you do with level 1 is different from what you do with level 4. But your students are getting exposed to contextualized language that's authentic, written by the people for the people. And I think that's critical and something that we sometimes neglect. And with technology now, it's so easy to pull authentic materials off the internet to use in your classes. Whereas when I was a teacher, the textbook was all that we had, unless you went to the library and photocopied a page, which I did actually a lot, and then printed off 10 times.
I think all the people did.
Yeah,
you were not the only one.
That was the only way to do it. So now we have so many opportunities to make language learning fun, engaging. My other 2 tips, and then I'll shut up here, is that when you're doing these authentic materials, make sure they're relevant to your students' age, something they're interested in, gaming or social media or whatever it is, because then they're going to want to know what that information is about and how it relates to them. So relevant and engaging is really important for us as language teachers, because students don't always come in with the enthusiasm and the dedication they need for a language.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Dr. Bowles. That was great listening to you. I really enjoyed, and I'm sure that all the followers, the ones that are watching us and the ones that are going to watch us later, because in Europe, it's late. It's about 9 o'clock. It's 1 o'clock in here. I'm sure they're going to enjoy today's talk, today's conversation. That was great having you and sharing your expertise in world Englishes and the way the language should be taught. Thank you greatly.
I appreciate it so much. This is my first time to do this. So for those of you listening or watching later, thank you for being such an attentive audience and joining us. And I don't know if there's opportunities for feedback or if they have questions or anything.
Okay, I don't think that, as we're streaming, we have the live stream late. Generally, we have questions, but I think as it is a little bit late, that's the time to go to sleep. I think we're not going to have questions today. No Q&A today, but I'm sure there will be questions a little bit later. Thank you greatly. Dear followers, thank you so much. Don't forget that we as educators, we are supposed to expose our kids to authentic materials. Don't forget that the authentic material will offer the possibility to the kids to learn the language, the authentic language. That's the most important. Don't forget that language is changing right now every single second. Absolutely. And we are supposed to be aware of that. Thank you greatly for being with us at another episode of Breakfast Intellectual Bites. Thank you, Dr. Bowles, for being with us today. It was great, and looking forward to seeing you virtually at other moments, interesting moments of the same Breakfast Intellectual Bites.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.